What about data frames? So let's think about an example again of a very simple data frame. I'm going to call it DAT, call the data.frame function. And I'm just going to define a simple data frame such as this data frame containing 3 vectors, name, height, and force, each of them with 3 elements. The name contains the name of 3 individuals, Leah, Luke, and Han. We have information about their heights. These are supposed to be represented in meters. And then finally, a logical vector to indicate whether they are force sensitive, true for the first 2 individuals, false for the 3rd individual. So in pictures, one way to draw this data frame is with the 3 vectors, one for name, another one for height, and another one for force. All of them are supposed to be vectors with 3 elements. Let me just write the general structure. And again, remember the way R is going to handle this guy is as a list internally. So I'm going to draw the blue boxes indicating that these are the wagons of our train DAT. You could also do something like this just to simplify the picture of the data frame. Draw it in a similar way to what a matrix could look like. Again, in which the first column, that's going to be name, the second column, that's going to be height, the third column, that's going to be force. And the reason why I'm drawing these 2 versions is because a data frame can actually be manipulated, again, with 2 types of subsetting operations. You could manipulate your data frame the same way you would manipulate a list, or you could also manipulate a data frame the same way you would manipulate a 2-dimensional array or matrix. So for example, if I want to get, let's say, the first column in my data frame using the matrix notation subsetting, I need a pair of brackets, say nothing for the indexing vector of the rows. For the indexing vector of the columns, again, I'm interested in getting the second column, so I'm going to specify 2, and that's it. And this will give me everything that is in the height vector of my data frame. What if I want to get a specific row, for example, the 3rd row in this case? So same idea, you just type the name of your data frame, bracket. Now we need to specify the number 3 for the indexing row, nothing for the columns, and then I close the bracket. And this will give me everything that it's in the, let me write it like this, in the 3rd row. Similar idea, let's say you want more than 1 column. Pretend you want the first and the 3rd column. Well, you would specify things similar way to manipulating a matrix, nothing for the rows, so an empty slot for the rows, and then for the indexing vector of the columns, I could combine inside the catenate function 1, 3. So that's going to be my indexing vector, and this should give me the first and the 3rd column, namely the name and the force vectors, something like this. Related to the bracket notation, we also have double brackets. So far, we've been seeing how to use single brackets, but you could also use double brackets. And I'm going to write something in abstract terms. So say you have some object. This object could be a vector, a matrix, a list, a data frame. The idea is to use 2 double brackets, opening double brackets. And then what you specify inside the brackets, let me write it like this, position in singular, just to indicate that when you use double brackets, the only thing you can specify inside them, it's a single position or some number or some vector with just 1 element. This is super important, otherwise you're gonna get an error. So for example, going back to our vector containing 4 elements, 2, 4, 6, and 8, if I want to extract the third element, I could also do vec double bracket. I want just the third element, so it has to be a single thing, a single element. And this is gonna give me the value number 6. With the example of our list, I'm just going to recreate it with the list function. The first value, it's gonna be a logical vector, true and false. That was our first element. And then the second guy is gonna be a numeric sequence from 1 to 3. Let's say you have this type of list. If you want to get, let's say, the logical vector with double brackets, then again, just use a pair of double brackets, indicate that you want everything in the first position, in the first car or first wagon of your train. And again, this will give you the logical vector with the true and the false. And super important, notice that I'm only drawing the green box of the vector. I'm not drawing a blue box. So this is actually what will give you, I'm gonna write it in words, what's inside the so-called wagon in your train. So this is important. If you actually want to get access to everything that is inside a specific wagon, a specific list element, this is where you need to use the pair of double brackets. Again, important things when using double brackets, as I just mentioned, if you specify a position that actually corresponds to more than one element, for example, say you specify from 1 to 2 with a numeric sequence using the colon operator like this will actually produce an error. So super important. It has to be a single number or a single position, something that is just one element. An interesting case of subsetting is when you have objects that have elements with names. So what's going on with objects that have named elements? I'm going to use the same example of my vector. Now let me give them names. One way to give them names is just write the name. It could be surrounded with quotes or without quotes. I'm going to use letter A for the first element, 2, B for the second element, 4, C for 6, and finally D for 8. This is one way to give names to the elements in a vector. Again, the picture is gonna look something like this. Our contiguous set of cells, 2, 4, 6, 8, and then their names A, B, C, D. When you have an object that has named elements, you can use the names of those elements inside the brackets. Now, when using the names of the elements inside the brackets, you do need to quote them. So that's important. And I could write something like this, vector bracket, character A. And as you can imagine, the output, it's gonna be the element 2. Another example could be vector bracket. Let's say I want to get the element named D and the element named B in that specific order. So I put everything into the combine function, and R will give me the vector 8 and 4 with their names D and B. Let's also give the name for the previous example, A. And this is how we could take advantage of the names in a vector to do subsetting with characters. What about data frames? And here I'm considering our previous data frame with 3 columns, name, height, and force. So internally, R is handling this data frame as a list with named elements, and the names are going to be name, height, and force. Those are the names of the 3 elements in our list. So we could also use single brackets and then referring to the columns. So I'm not going to specify anything for the rows, but I could specify the name, let's say height, for example, within quotes, in order to do character subsetting. So taking advantage that there is the column height, and that's the name of that element, I could use bracket notation to extract that second column. As you can imagine, you could also do the same thing For instance, say you want to get the column force in the first place and then the column name in the second place, then you put those names inside a character vector like this, and then pass this vector as the indexing vector for the columns inside single brackets.